Yes. Forced diversity. The worst thing to happen to Hollywood films since Michael Bay found out what Transformers were. We see it everywhere. Massive blockbuster films stroking their own egos for having diverse writing rooms and casts, touting themselves as agents of change by doing the bare minimum for social change and racial justice. And then, when we see their work, it becomes apparent that they were so focused on how good and virtuous they looked that they forgot to write anything meaningful or worthwhile. And perhaps we would respect them more if they had the courage and confidence to at least stick to their moral virtues, instead seemingly falling back on all the big talk as if they don't truly believe in what they say, but they like how it sounds and they like how it looks, so they say it anyways. But if you're not actively looking for these things, how often does something like that actually happen in the writer's room? And when a production is proud of their diversity, both in the people that work for them and the cast of characters they create, how often are those stories actually bad? Yes, there's a great deal of people in writing, critique, and review spaces who will paint this narrative, to the point that I believe there's a great deal of people who believe it is far more prominent than it really is.
I'm so excited to go there, and I love nothing more than gender ambiguity!
The truth is, we don't have to watch these shows or care about them at all. In fact, I can't think of a cast or production off the top of my head which has done something like this aside from maybe that one Ghostbusters film where they replaced the men with women, and even though the apparent reboot after that reboot did better, I also think there are some people who were like, wait, the female Ghostbusters wasn't the most recent Ghostbusters? And that's because Ghostbusters Afterlife was even worse of a movie if we compare review scores. Yet, not because it was so bad, but because it was so boring that nobody cared. And let me acknowledge my bias here. I have watched neither of these movies. I don't know if either movie is actually good or bad. I can see the reviews and assume that they were both bad. However, I can only remember the female Ghostbusters having their bad writing attributed to wokeism and forced diversity, while Ghostbusters Afterlife barely even got so much as a whisper from fans, despite being just as poorly written. And this brings me to my first point about this whole discussion regarding forced diversity. What exactly is forced diversity in films, and when do we consider it forced diversity? What criteria do we judge this by, and how does it make a movie, TV show, game, book, or comic worse? Could it also not be that we are simply annoyed by or uncomfortable with the concept of diversity in fiction? And could we not also say that the people making scathing reviews and commentaries on the next forced diversity films are not themselves just looking for things they dislike purely on the basis of politics? All the while ironically claiming that they are apolitical and that their aversion to wokeism and forced diversity has nothing to do with their own inherent political or personal biases. Does diversity make a bad movie even worse? Or is it that we are just biased against it and the bad writing makes us look to it as the root cause? I think it's the latter, personally. I think the meta-critique of forced diversity is only around when the rest of the story is poorly written. People correlate two things together and they say it happens all the time, but the problem with correlation and anecdotal evidence is that you are blinded to statistical truth. Correlation is not causation, and your cherry-picked dataset of movies you love to hate and criticize for being too woke or possessing forced diversity is not a valid dataset that would be used in any sort of literature or thesis. And yet we have people out here acting as if it's the truth of the world, that fiction and the people who write them are automatically making worse decisions during production because they are trying to virtue signal and force diversity in your face, and oh my god, it's everywhere, I can't escape it. And again, I also hate when writers stroke their own egos, but I dislike it for a different reason. I think people with condescending savior complexes are annoying, but I also think that's a sentiment shared by a lot of people, and it's a sentiment a lot of other people love to use as a tool for convincing you to speak against your own interests. Because at the end of the day, the truth is that forced diversity really doesn't make a story bad, nor does it make a character bad. Forced diversity is a term used to dismiss characters and stories on the basis that there are too many minorities depicted in them. It's a silent way to say minorities make me uncomfortable, and instead of perhaps addressing that within ourselves, we attempt to deny it. We say, well, look at all of these examples of stories with good minority characters, as if it justifies us dismissing what we do simply because it depicts some sort of diversity. We should allow stories to fail on their own objective merits instead of latching onto metacritiques like forced diversity and digging up as many nitpicks as we can to complain about something we simply don't enjoy. And we are so selfish as to think that our nitpicks and arguments are the correct one simply because we can convey them well and simply because people seem to agree with them. But what about the people that feel represented by those shows? What about the diverse groups who live in reality and must constantly wonder if the next thing they come to enjoy is going to be the target of a hate campaign simply because people think the diversity in what they liked was forced? As if a character's very existence must be justified by good writing, or it's not worthy of being there to begin with. As if it is difficult to write diverse characters into your stories. As if it is a kindness and a gift bestowed upon the poor minorities who have nothing. It's the bare minimum. And it always has been. The only justified response to forced diversity is that it did not go far enough for someone to be stroking their own ego over it. To call out that their story is an exception to the rule is only a reminder to those groups that the rule exists in the first place. I think all diversity in fiction is good, and while I don't think writers should be forced to write diverse casts if they do not want to, I also don't think all diverse casts should be held to an unfair standard of quality just to be allowed to exist in front of people. Diverse casts should be allowed to fail. They should be allowed to have bad writing. They should be free from the metacritiques of race and diversity. They should be free from having to worry about some random dude on the internet telling them that their well-intentioned effort to write a diverse cast of characters is the reason their story failed.
Fucking pronouns!
As if diversity on its own must be justified, as if they must prove to racist people that they have a right to exist in fiction too by being exceptional, told constantly by the majority that they are simply asking too much to be treated entirely equally because it offends their own sensibilities. The same majority who gets offended that they are not represented in media as much as they were in the past, somehow simultaneously telling minority groups that they don't need a character to look like them to enjoy that character, only to throw a tantrum when they see a minority in a leading role. How many times do writers actually stroke their ego over having a diverse cast and characters? And how many more times do audience assume that this is what writers do, simply because they have been conditioned to assume that that's what's happening behind the scenes? How often must we assume that diversity and inclusion is something someone would only involve in their stories if they were a vain, ego-stroking con artist masking as a writer? Can we not acknowledge that enjoying a diverse cast is simply what we choose to do as writers? Is it so outlandish to think that some, if not most writers, stand by their virtues and strongly hold the belief that everyone should be equally and respectfully represented in the stories that they make? And how many times must we confuse a lack of practice in writing diverse casts to a lack of talent, as if writers cannot grow and learn to do better, as if writers cannot see where others fail and do something different? The next time you see something being criticized as forced diversity, I think it would do a lot of good to question where that claim actually comes from. I'm not here to tell you what to believe or stand on a soapbox and admonish you for believing that forced diversity is harmful to a story. I'm here to get you to consider what you believe and why you believe it. Make your own conscious decision to believe in something, and when you hear rhetoric, ensure that you are aware that it is just that, rhetoric. It's okay to be convinced by rhetoric. It's not okay to be unaware that you are convinced by rhetoric. It is not okay to regurgitate rhetoric you do not fully understand, to parrot ideas which you yourself may not truly believe had you given it a little bit more thought. I believe all diversity is good. I don't believe it's mandatory, but I do believe it's good. At worst, it's harmless to a story's narrative. What is truly harmful to a story's narrative is the lack of attention and care put into crafting that narrative. Sure, we as writers may have just as much to say about the world and what we believe, but does that make an interesting story on its own? Part of writing and storytelling is creating a story which gets people to care, which puts lessons into words and makes sure that we never forget them. How we convey our message can be just as important as what that message is. Even if people say all the wrong things, so long as it is said in the right way, people will still believe it. So why not practice saying the right things in the right ways? Even though I believe diversity should be allowed to be poorly written, I also encourage those who want to write diverse casts to write it well. Some people will only be convinced of your message if it is said enough times in the right way. Some people will only accept certain groups if they can see that those groups have something to offer them. And while I'm not saying we must appeal to bigoted and hateful people, I am saying that they should be isolated from reasonable people in every way possible. The only minority that should be oppressed and humiliated is the minority of people who hate others for how they were born. Changing the world for the better is much like changing ourselves for the better. There will be times where we make rapid progress, but most of the time we will plateau or perhaps even regress. But if we maintain a consistent effort to make great, diverse characters in fiction, then one day people will no longer be starved of representation. Every man, woman, child, and beyond will have someone they can look up to and reflect off of, to know that we as people are not alone, and that each of us is more alike than we are different. That sounds sappy. It sounds like a dream, but writing is our dreams, thoughts, and beliefs put to paper. Instead of dreaming of better times coming back to us, I would rather dream of a future where there has been no better time than that moment. If the best we can do is limited by what we have done before, then we will only ever be at the mercy of our past. But the only way to do better is to practice and to act. So in your own small way, if you are a writer who has been thinking of how good you used to be, then take this moment to figure out how great you still have yet to become and start writing.